In 2021, Barcelona owed more than 1.3 billion euros. One of the biggest football clubs in the world was effectively broke. They couldn't register players, they couldn't renew contracts, and most shockingly of all, they couldn't even afford Lionel Messi. The greatest player in the club's history was forced to leave, not because he wanted to, because Barcelona simply couldn't make the numbers work. So how did one of the most successful football clubs in football history end up here? To understand Barcelona's collapse, you first need to understand how powerful they once were. Between 2008 and 2015, Barcelona became football's gold standard. They had Lionel Messi, Xavi, Iniesta, Busquets, Dani Alves and Gerard Piqué. Under Pep Guardiola, they built one of the greatest football teams ever assembled. They didn't just win games, they controlled them. Opponents could barely touch the ball. Barcelona were winning Champions Leagues, dominating La Liga and producing Ballon d'Or winners almost every year. Everything seemed perfect. Then came Neymar. Together with Messi and Luis Suarez, Barcelona created one of the most dangerous attacking trios football had ever seen. The famous MSN partnership. Between them, they scored hundreds of goals, won trophies and terrified defenders across Europe. Many fans genuinely believed this team could dominate football for another decade, but behind the scenes, cracks were already starting to appear. Then football changed forever. In 2017, Paris Saint-Germain activated Neymar's release clause and paid 222 million euros. At the time, it was the biggest transfer in football history by an unbelievable margin. Nobody thought it would happen. But suddenly, Barcelona had lost one of the best players in the world and received a mountain of cash in return. The problem was what they did next. Instead of rebuilding carefully, Barcelona panicked. They felt pressure to replace Neymar immediately. First came Ousmane Dembélé for more than 100 million euros. Then Philippe Coutinho for another enormous fee. Then Antoine Griezmann, another superstar signing. On paper, these looked like world-class transfers. In reality, they became symbols of everything that went wrong. Dembélé struggled with injuries and consistency. Coutinho never truly fit the team. Griezmann never became the player Barcelona expected. The club spent hundreds of millions of euros trying to solve one problem and somehow made it even worse. But transfer fees weren't Barcelona's biggest issue. Salaries were. The club started handing out enormous contracts. Some of the biggest contracts football had ever seen. Messi's deal alone became one of the most expensive sports contracts in history. Meanwhile, other stars were earning huge wages too. Suarez, Busquets, Piqué, Griezmann, Coutinho. The wage bill kept growing every year. At one point, Barcelona was spending more than 70% of their revenue on wages alone. For most clubs, that number should be closer to 50%. Barcelona were operating in a completely different reality. At the center of all this was club president Josep Maria Bartomeu. During his leadership, spending exploded. Recruitment became chaotic. Long-term planning disappeared. Every setback seemed to lead to another expensive signing. Every problem seemed to be solved by spending more money. Barcelona was still winning matches and competing for trophies. So many fans didn't notice the danger. But financially, the club was heading toward disaster. Then came the pandemic. Stadiums closed, matchday revenue disappeared, commercial income slowed down. The financial problems Barcelona had been hiding for years suddenly became impossible to ignore. Debt was rising, revenue was falling, the club was trapped. For years, Barcelona had spent like one of the richest clubs in the world. Now they had to face reality. Then came the moment that shocked football: Lionel Messi leaving Barcelona. After more than 20 years at the club, after countless trophies, after hundreds of goals, and after becoming arguably the greatest player in football history, Messi was gone. Not because he wanted to leave, not because Barcelona wanted to sell him, because they simply couldn't afford to keep him under La Liga's financial rules. The image of Messi crying during his farewell press conference became one of the most emotional moments in football history. And it confirmed something many fans still struggled to accept: Barcelona were broken. Which brings us to the question football fans still ask today. If Barcelona were broke, how are they still signing players? The answer is something called financial levers. Barcelona started selling parts of their future income. Future television revenue, future commercial revenue, future assets. in exchange for money today. It allowed them to register players, improve the squad, and remain competitive. Supporters saw new signings arriving and wondered how a club with so much debt could still spend money. The answer was simple. Barcelona weren't creating new money, they were bringing future money into the present. And for a while, it actually seemed to work. New players arrived, the squad improved, Barcelona became competitive again. Fans started believing that the worst was over. After years of financial disaster, there finally seemed to be a plan. The club wasn't collapsing anymore. They were fighting for trophies again. They were back in the Champions League. And from the outside, things looked much healthier than before. But not everyone was convinced, because critics argued that Barcelona hadn't really solved the problem. They had simply moved it into the future. The debt hadn't magically disappeared. The financial mistakes of the past were still there. The club had simply found a way to buy itself more time. And that's where the debate began. Were the financial levers a brilliant solution? Or were they simply another gamble? Supporters of the strategy argue that it saved the club. Critics argue that it simply delayed the problem. And that's the biggest question surrounding Barcelona today. Have they actually fixed the damage? Or have they simply bought themselves more time? Because eventually, the future becomes the present. And when that happens, Barcelona will still need to deal with the consequences of decisions made years earlier. That's why many financial experts continue to watch the club closely. The immediate crisis may be over, but the long-term challenge remains. Barcelona still need revenue, they still need success, they still need Champions League football, and they still need to manage one of the most complicated financial situations in modern sport. Barcelona's story is one of the most remarkable stories in modern football. They had the greatest player of all time, one of the greatest teams ever assembled, one of the biggest fan bases in the world, and somehow, despite all of that, they still ended up over €1 billion in debt. It's a warning that even the biggest clubs can fail if they spend without a plan, because success can hide problems for years. When trophies keep arriving, nobody asks difficult questions. When the team keeps winning, financial mistakes are easy to ignore. But eventually, reality catches up, and when it does, even the biggest clubs in the world aren't protected from the consequences. Barcelona learned that lesson the hard way. They lost Neymar, they lost financial control, they lost Lionel Messi, and for a moment, they even seemed to lose their identity. Yet somehow, despite everything, the club survived. And even today, nobody knows whether Barcelona has truly recovered. Maybe the worst is finally behind them. Maybe the financial levers bought the club exactly the time it needed. Or maybe the consequences of those decisions are still waiting somewhere in the future. Only time will tell.